Hey guys! Today we are going to be doing a different video. I'm going to be reviewing all of the most romantic books that I've read so far in 2021, and if you're watching this not knowing when I'm recording it, I recorded this in June. Wait, no, July 1st. So yeah, okay. And I've only read like 20 books so far this year, and I also only read romance novels, so I'm a little biased. So let's get into it. Let's start with the first book that I actually read in 2021. So the first book that I read this year was actually The Guest List by Lucy Foley. And I'm not gonna lie, this book is not a just premise of romance. So if you're solely just wanting like a full-on romance and you're similar to me and you get bored easily, you might get a little confused if you start reading this, but I'm telling you, I literally have the attention span of a fish when it comes to anything that's not romance related. That's probably like a personality trait problem. But this book was so good from start to finish, and I was hooked the whole time. It's literally like a murder mystery, but it's based at a wedding, and there's so many like secrets that you kind of unlock throughout the experience. It starts with this girl, and she goes there, and there's this like guy there that she kind of hates. It's kind of enemies to lovers backdrop, although I'm not gonna lie, I don't really remember the ending, but I do know that I was like hooked from start to finish, and it had such an intense ending, and there is a lot of like intrigue and like who did it kind of dialogue, but there's also like some romance and there's like some spice, and you get to learn more about like who this girl is, and also who everyone else is, the slower that it builds, but it's also like kind of a wild ride from start to finish. You don't really get bored. It says you'd kill to be on it, because they go to an island for this like wedding, and then you have to kind of uncover who the murderer is, and it's pretty cool. I like it. But there's also like romance, and it's kind of like chicklit murder mystery wedding party thing. So the second book that I read this year was The Honeymooners by Christina, and it's such a good book. Honestly, from start to finish, I was completely hooked, and it was also like a fun book to get back into. Also, just like side note for reference, I'm 26 and I read books that are ideally like people in their 20s, but I'm not like opposed to reading teen fiction or young adult. I just prefer like new adult romance. But The UnHoneymooners is a book where basically the maid of honor and the best man go to the wedding, and they're the only people that don't eat at the buffet, and I guess everyone else ends up getting sick, and the maid of honor is also like the sister to the bride, so the bride calls her or whatever and is like, hey, you have to go on my honeymoon because no one else can go, I'm too sick, I can't go. And the best man also has to go on the honeymoon. And also, side note, they hate each other, like they've always been standoffish. They only like go or end up around each other for like family functions, but other than that, like they're not really each other's biggest fan. And then they both end up going, and the maid of honor, or the main character, ends up seeing like her boss that she's about to get hired at the company with, and she doesn't know what to tell them, or she doesn't plan on lying to the boss, but then like someone comes up to her and calls her Mrs. So-and-so. So basically they have to pretend to be married in front of the boss, and like there's this whole like weird like enemies to lovers tension, and there's so much cuteness as well, and you really get to like see like this like edgier, you know, guy character comes up like cool and reserved, but then there's like a lot of layers to it. And yeah, 10 out of 10 would recommend. The UnHoneymooners is such a really good book. It's also really fun to read right after the first one that I just recommended you guys, The Guest List, because they're both kind of like wedding chicklit books, except The Guest List is a little bit more dark and edgy, kind of like Handmaid's Tale with humor, which sounds like a little problematic, but I'm just trying to capture the like tone of the book, if that makes sense. And The UnHoneymooners is more of like a I don't know, I would envision like Brittany Murphy and Ashton Kutcher being in it, because it's like more cheeky, more like humorous, but there's also like a lot of depth to it that like when you end up in the middle of the book, you're kind of like, oh my god. And it's great. So 10 out of 10 for that one. And then the next book that I read, okay, so TikTok recommended me this book, and honestly, like it was one of the best first books that I could have been recommended from TikTok, although like now all of my money's going to all of my, you know, BookTok suggestions, so double-edged sword. But Colleen Hoover, this is actually the first Colleen Hoover book that I ever read. It's called Ugly Love. Oh my god, you guys, this book is intense, and I'm also saying like it's not G-rated. Like if you're like a 17, 18-year-old and you're not really used to new adult romances, I would recommend just like being mindful of the fact that it's not G-rated, but it is such a good book. Honestly, there's not a book yet that I've read by Colleen Hoover that I've hated, and like I guess I sound more surprised than I actually am, because like I usually have I get bored easily. I have like severe ADD, but I was sucked in from the beginning. It's about this like enemies to lovers dynamic. Actually, a lot of the books that I'm going to suggest to you guys are enemies to lovers, so just fair warning. They're like neighbors and they hate each other, and then there's like a lot of layers behind this guy, there's a lot of layers behind this girl, and they've both been single for a really long time, so like they decided to be like friends with benefits, but they also like still have these weird undertones of just like hating each other, but then they like end up catching feelings, and the guy is like super secretive, and there's like a lot of baggage that he has. Like the first night she meets him, he's like crying on the couch saying someone's name, but like he's been single for a really long time, and there's like a lot of layers behind like what happened with that. And then yeah, they slowly like fall in love, and they have like a really intense misunderstanding, and you have to read the book to find out what happens. But oh my god, it's honestly, it's such a good book because it tells you like the layers of relationships and like love. And I mean, it's literally called Ugly Love, so like it's going to be not the stereotypical Cinderella fairy tale, but it's going to be so worth it because it's realistic in a really like grim and morbid way. It's realistic. Don't worry though, it has a happy ending. I'm not saying that it has like a bad ending, but it's a really good way of kind of being honest about two characters who are imperfect. But mentioning imperfect, I will mention another Colleen Hoover book in 1 second. But yeah, honestly, Ugly Love is such a good book. It gives me a more intense version of the UnHoneymooners. I feel like all of my books are kind of like blurring together in this like sequence so far, so I like that. And yeah, okay, so let's go into the next book that I read. Okay, so actually I believe I read this book too right after the Ugly Love book, and this is another Colleen Hoover book, and this is called It Ends With Us. And I'm not gonna lie, if you're wanting just like a cheeky chicklit romance from start to finish with like nothing else in between, you probably wouldn't want to pick up this book immediately. But this is still a romance. It still has a romantic ending. It still has, excuse me, a happy ending, but it's a book that, like, as annoying as this probably sounds, every person needs to read this book. Every girl needs to read this book. Everyone in general needs to read this book because without giving away any spoilers, it's basically just like warnings about different relationship dynamics and how some people you don't see the red flags until you're too deep into it. And I think It Ends With Us is a really romantic book, but I read it with no understanding of what I was getting into. And yeah, there's like a lot of like spoiler commentary that I want to add to this, but I don't want to like give anything away, and I don't know how much the synopsis is like exposed to people, but I will say you need to read this book. It has a good ending, but it's really important. It has an extremely important message about relationships and about, again, like missing red flags until you're too invested, and learning how to kind of like walk away from dynamics that aren't hurting you or aren't healthy to you. So I can't recommend it enough. There is a lot of romance. You still get like all of the, you know, Colleen Hoover vibes if you read Ugly Love and then you read It Ends With Us. You still get a lot of that similarity out of it, but it's not, again, it's not like a happy walk through the park from start to finish. Ow. Okay, so the next book that I read is Roomhate. And the cover is really cheesy, I'm not gonna lie. There's also like a lot of undertones about this book that I'm not like a huge fan of, but it is another enemies to lovers book. The It Ends With Us book isn't an enemies to lovers book, but the Roomhate book is. So basically it's a book about these childhood friends who lose touch with one another, or I think like the girl has to forgive the guy for something, but her grandma dies, and then they both end up having to be, they get like the lease to the house, or they get the rights to the house, so they both own this house together because the grandma gave it to them, but they haven't talked since they were like kids, and I guess there's like a lot of baggage or reason for that. So they both end up in the house, like I guess this one summer, because like it's like right after the grandma dies or something, and she goes in and she sees him and his girlfriend's there, and it's really awkward, and she's trying to be like really nice to like smooth things over because she's the one that like left him in the first place, and there's a lot of backstory for that you'll find out when you read it. And he like hates her, like he's holding a grudge, he does not want to forgive her, he does not want to let her in, he's kind of just like, hey, yeah, we both have the rights to this house. Maybe we'll sell it in the future. We'll figure that out as we go. If you want to be here this summer, I can't stop you, but just like leave me alone. And then she's like trying to just kind of like, you know, smooth things over, because I guess they were like best friends in the past. I mean, obviously her grandma gave him half the rights to the house, so there's like a lot of emotional attachment with one another in the beginning. But yeah, so you go through this whole story of like enemies to lovers. He has a girlfriend that lives with him in the house for the summer, and like the girl is also like kind of friends with the girl that is the main character, the one that like the grandma died. They actually get along, so it's not like a weird catty dynamic either, which I really liked, and I will say I respected that. This is not a Penelope Douglas book, which I thought it was. It's a Penelope Ward book, but I didn't dislike it. It has a happy ending. I definitely was invested from start to finish, so I don't want to make it sound like I didn't enjoy it. I definitely did. I just think in retrospect, compared to all the other books I read recently, it's like not my most favorite because of that, but definitely not mad at it. Well, let's talk about the next 3 books that I read. I went on a whole down the rabbit hole kind of journey into a Greek mythology story. And granted, like, I'm not really even a huge Greek mythology buff, so you don't really have to be a super big mythology Greek person, fan, buff to appreciate the series. I did read The Goddess Tests a long time ago by like Amy someone, and it was really good and I wasn't mad at it. But yeah, so anyways, this is A Touch of Darkness by Scarlett St. Clair, and the first 2 books I loved. It was very much like literally like Hades, the ruler of the underworld, the god of the underworld. It like owns this nightclub, and this girl goes, her mother is a goddess. It's Demeter. Basically, it's Persephone and Hades' love story. But yeah, Persephone is this girl with this really controlling mom, Demeter, and she's a goddess, but it's like a secret. So she ends up going to this club, and basically you're not supposed to like make a deal with Hades, because if you make a deal with Hades, then like he, you know, owns rights to like some kind of prophecy with you. Basically, he's like Ursula in this scenario, and she accidentally makes a deal with him, not knowing that she does. And they have all this like weird sexual like tension and chemistry, and you know, it's kind of like, it gives me like vampire romance energy, because he's like been around for ages and she's like not been around for ages, and so he's like this very knowledgeable, like brooding, you know, emo kind of energy, but he's also like very much like I hate everyone but you energy. So yeah, nothing but good things about the series. I will say I got bored at the 3rd book just because it got more into like war and politics, and honestly, like, you guys, I just love romance. I have the attention span of Dory. I just want to watch or indulge in romance, and when there's none of it, it gets boring for me. But I think if you can also really appreciate like politics and like, you know, the war and like the nuances around that, you could probably really appreciate the 3rd book and be better than me. But yeah, A Touch of Darkness series, by far one of the best Greek mythology books that I read this year. However, it is not the number 1. We are going to talk about the number 1 in a second. But yeah, okay. Next book that I read, this one's problematic. So let me preface this with this one. You should look at trigger warnings before reading this. You should look at kinks and taboos and things like that. It is a romance novel, but it's like I feel like it's like mainly for people with like kinks and stuff, and it's like super 50 Shades of Grey energy, but like with someone's whole family, but they're not even related by blood. It's a little intense. Will I tell you that I'm not a kink streamer, like that I enjoyed the ride of like the experience of just like reading it without knowing what I was getting into? It was entertaining. I'm not gonna pretend that it wasn't. My political correctness though, like, did not appreciate it, and I didn't like, okay, I'll just show you. So this is Penelope Douglas's Credence, and this is probably her most problematic book. I will say, when I was scrolling booktok and it popped up, I did not think like I was going to get into what I got into. There were no warnings, no disclaimers, and also people on TikTok are a lot more like, should I say problematic? They're a lot more supportive of this book, whereas like when I first tweeted that I was gonna read this book on my Twitter, and everyone's a lot more politically correct on Twitter, people were very intense, reactionary with why I was reading the book. I didn't even know what I was getting into, so I deleted the tweet. But yeah, long story short, this girl's parents die. The uncle is not related to her by blood. He's like adopted or something. I don't remember the details, but he like wants to like take care of her, and she's like 17. And then he has 2 sons. And long story short, I'm like, how much should I say about this book? She ends up dating everyone. Yeah, so it's very intense, and honestly, like, the older, mature part of me that just enjoys, like, you know, a dumb romance or whatever, I'm kind of like, okay, if it was just like some wild summer and she's just not really blood related to anyone and she's just like doing whatever, she doesn't end up turning 18 before they talk about stuff, then like it would have been fine for me. But like at the end, like she ends up like being with one, you know, like she has like a happy ending scenario with one of them, and it's just kind of weird to me. Like it shows like them, like a montage of like them like later in life too, with like a family and stuff, and I just think that's it was a weird ending for me. I could have gone my whole life without like, oh, and she ends up being with one of them after literally being with all of them. So that was like kind of strange, but apart from that, I don't know if I just spoiled that. So I'm gonna like post like a little spoiler warning here, but yeah. Did I enjoy the book while I was reading it? Yes. Would I recommend it without feeling bad somehow? Yeah, I don't think I would recommend it. Read it if you want a wild ride from start to finish, and you don't think that you will get triggered or offended. I mean, you might get offended, but read it at your own risk, basically. But yeah, definitely an intense book. Definitely kind of like something that you should just read for literally nothing other than fun. The next book that I read was The Hating Game, which was actually a really nice book to get into right after the craziness that was Credence. And The Hating Game, I'm not gonna lie, when I first picked up the book, my ADD and like everything, Colleen Hoover writes these really intense, amazing introductions or meet cues with like the characters introducing each other, meeting one another, and it's intense and it's pretty cool, and I liked that. But the way that Sally Thorne wrote The Hating Game, it was kind of like a slow burning thing, and again, like my severe ADD and impatience and all of that, at first I like read the first chapter and like put it down, and I didn't really want to read it. And then but I will say, once I actually gave it a second chance, by like the 5th or 6th chapter, I was kind of sucked in, and when I finished the book, it was like one of the best books that I read. It is such a good book. I understand why they're making it a movie now, because it's like there's so many like scenes or so many like chapters in there that are just so intense, but also very like movie-esque and very much like good monologues and good things and good points to get across. And I think both characters are just like misunderstood. I definitely think the guy in the book is very much I hate everyone but you energy. Definitely enemies to lovers. Yeah, it meets like a lot of book talk recommendations and suggestions, which is why I understand I got recommended to read this on BookTok. But can't say enough good things about this book. If you're looking for like a sweet romance with like some spice, some intensity, some flavor, definitely read The Hating Game. I think that, I don't know if people talk about it a lot or not, because I'm still getting new into the book talk realm of things, but it was definitely one of the best books that I read so far this year. Next book, Punk 57 was such a good book, and it was actually written by Penelope Douglas as well, and she redeemed herself to me with this book, because it was not strange and have any kind of like strange scenarios with romantic interests. It was just a boy and a girl who were pen pals growing up, and they never met each other. They don't know what each other looks like. But then I guess he ends up going to the school undercover and realizes who she is, and then like hates her. She's nothing like he thought that she was going to be. He feels like lied to. You know, they both are a lot more edgy and real and honest with themselves during the pen pal relationship, and when he meets her, she's kind of like preppy, and he's kind of like, what the heck, and she's kind of mean. She's not that nice. So he ends up being super mean to her, and extreme enemies to lovers energy, extreme I hate everyone but you energy, very spicy. Penelope Douglas definitely conveys the same energy from Credence that she does in Punk 57 without it being insane. but definitely enjoyable. I would say it's definitely my top 5 favorite of romances that I read this year, and it is actually based in high school, which I guess is a little weird because there are like, you know, romance scenes and things, but I guess like technically it's not like high schoolers aren't aware of those things. So yeah, I think they're 18 or something. But yeah, so this is, I think, the actually only young adult book that I read in the series. I don't know if it's labeled young adult, but this is like the only book that I think I read where it's like 2 high schoolers. But yeah, and then, okay, so this is actually the #1 best book that I read this year. Although I will say, like, don't read this book if you are not wanting to cry and get emotionally destroyed by like how romantic and beautiful the story is. If you don't care about those things and you're like ready to have a good time, and also get your heart broken maybe and put back together, then read this book. And I think everyone talks about this book, so I don't think I'm like groundbreaking, but The Song of Achilles, and it's by Madeline Miller. This is the best book I've ever read in my whole life. Now let me be transparent with you. I have severe ADD. I think I've mentioned this like 20 times now. Did I savor every sentence of every chapter, of every detail? No. I am very bored easily with things that are not just solely romantic, and I did skim a lot of this. Did I still end or finish the book crying? Yes. Not saying that you should be like me and skim. I definitely would recommend that other people savor this book more, take their time with it. Don't try to just like rush to the finish line, because I did do that. But every time that, basically it's about this boy named Patroclus, and he meets, it's kind of like Looking for Alaska energy, but also like with Greek mythology. And I loved Looking for Alaska when I was a teenager. So yeah, but basically Patroclus is like this, he has like such a sad life, such a hard life, and really like mean, awful, I guess like a father, basically. I don't remember his mother being around much, or I think she passed, you know, but basically he has a really awful father, and then he goes to like the courts, he gets like punished, and then he meets Achilles, and Achilles is like this great, you know, god, and he's like this, you know, mythical being and almighty, but they lock eyes, and then they have like a very deep connection, and it's like a lot more than just, you know, like a platonic friendship. And then, long story short, obviously no one wants them to be together. I think if you're familiar with Greek mythology, then like a lot of the twists and turns and maybe spoilers won't be that crazy for you. But I will say that I haven't seen a negative review about this book series yet, so I would be very surprised if you would read this and have any disappointments. The way that this book is written is so beautiful from start to finish. It is probably the most beautifully written book that I've read, apart from like if you've read what is it, The Wrath and the Dawn. If you read The Wrath and the Dawn, or you read Caraval, and you like how beautifully written those books are and how just like poetic they are, you would very much love Song of Achilles. Song of Achilles is a romance, and it's not so much focused around chicklit or like comedy or like humor. Not trying to make it sound unappealing, but it's more intense. It's more like The Notebook. It's more like a, you know, Nicholas Sparks romance. It's intense, it's beautiful, it's poetic, it will destroy you. So, you know, fair warning there, but it is one of the best romances I've read. And yeah, so definitely 10 out of 10, #1 book, best book that I've read in 2021, best romance of 2021 that I've read. So yeah. And then the next book that I read is All Your Perfects by Colleen Hoover. Oops, where is the cover? Okay, so All Your Perfects is by Colleen Hoover, and honestly, like, she just continues to make really great books. I haven't read a book yet that I disliked from her. The next book I'm about to read actually is another Colleen Hoover book. Let me know if you guys want me to do like a book vlog as well, because I'm kind of wanting to, but I'm also like unsure if people really watch those other than me. But yeah, so All Your Perfects is literally about a past and present book. So each chapter is like past and then present, and it's the past will show like how like two people falling in love, and the present shows kind of like a failed marriage or marriage problems. And I really like the way that it's written, because for one, Colleen Hoover is really good at writing realistic love stories where it shows, you know, that not everything is just a fairy tale with a happy ending, that love is like hard work, and you know that things take time, but it's also like a good book to just read to gain a different perspective. Happy ending though. I don't think I read a book yet with a bad ending. But yeah, so really good ending, but it's also like it breaks your heart a little bit because it's kind of like you'll see them really in love and then you flip to the next chapter and then they're just like going through it, and then it's like you're rooting for them, but then you keep, you know, seeing things or learning things and it gets super intense. But it has a really good ending, and it's a really good just like mature relationship. So again, if you're like me, mid-20s, you know, about to go into your 30s, or if you are in your 30s or above, this is a really good book. I would 10 out of 10 recommend. So the last book that I read, the most recent book that I've actually read, is the Beach Read. And the Beach Read was such a good book. It's honestly, I will say, like, I think it might be one of my favorites. It's basically about two authors, so it has like witty dialogue, which I really like because I'm super sarcastic. I have a lot of like air and fire in my chart, so I like two characters that can kind of like dish it and, you know, take it, and, you know, that kind of like rapport or energy. Two authors. One is kind of like one of those, how do I say, Catcher in the Rye types. Like he's a brooding, elitist kind of energy, like writes mysteries or, you know, murders, or, you know, writes about things that are like intellectual. And she is a romance novelist. They actually know each other. It cut off on me because I forgot to charge my battery, so I'm just going to record this really fast here. But yeah, they actually went to school with one another, and they did not like each other. They were not good friends, and then I guess like years later, her dad passes away and she goes to this house. I can't really say too much without giving stuff away, but she goes to this house, and then she ends up seeing that he's the neighbor, and they don't get along. I can't stress this enough. They hated each other in college. She has like a lot of like just like dislike towards this guy. She thinks he's pretentious. Definitely hardcore enemies to lovers energy. Definitely hardcore. But it's interesting because they end up making a pact, and she challenges him. She's like, I bet you could never make a romance novel. And then he's like, I bet you could never make a intellectual piece, I don't know, murder mystery piece, or sad story. I think it says like you can never make like a sad story or something. And then so they make a pact, and then they have to end up like hanging out with one another because he takes her to places that are like murder mystery related, and then she takes him to like these like romantic places to inspire his book. And he takes her on these like crazy like interviewing people that like leave cults and stuff. And eventually they have a little bit of spice, they have a little bit of romance. And yeah, so it was a really cute book from start to finish. And I know that everyone keeps recommending her other book a lot, Emily Henry's other book. I think it's called People Who Meet on Vacation, and that's the book that I'm going to read after the book that I'm about to read. I'm about to start November 9 by Colleen Hoover, and then I'm gonna read People We Meet on Vacation next. But yeah, so that is overall the gist of all of the books that I read. And if I had to rank them, like at least top 5, I would say Song of Achilles would be number 1. I would say Really Love would be number 2. Punk 57 would be number 3. And then I would say The Hating Game number 4. And Beach Read number 5. Yeah, so Song of Achilles, Punk 57, Ugly Love, Hating Game, Beach Read. Yeah, so far that's like my top 5 for 2021. However, I'm only halfway through 2021. Hello, editing me here, letting you guys know that shortly after I made this video or recorded this video, I read November 9, and then I read Love in Other Words, and November 9 was like actually my favorite book so far of 2021. I know I said Song of Achilles, and Song of Achilles is still like the sweet spot book for me, but definitely November 9 gutted me. And yeah, so I did record some of that, and I did post like a clip previously, and I will maybe post content about that in my next week's video. But yeah, so November 9 and the other book that I just mentioned are both very good books and kind of ruin this top 5 list that I just created for you guys. I'm sorry. And I still have a lot on my TBR. So let me know if you guys want me to do a book vlog where I'm like reviewing the book as I read it. Comment below and tell me if you read any of these books, what you think of these books. And please, you know, do all the algorithm stuff. And yeah, I'll see you in my next video.